Welcome back after a break. On this week's episode of Waiver Watch, we are covering the last 2 weeks of waivers that we missed. In order for you to not waste your time, we'll give you a quick heads up on what's coming ahead. Weekly waiver totals, as always. Number 2, 107.35. That is multiple operations of UAS. Michael McGee, University of Texas, El Paso. Number 3, Florida Power and Light. This is a flurry of waivers there. Triple waiver. Number 4, 107.31 and 33. This is Airobotics. A revision to their original waivers. A 107.51 high altitude waiver. UPS Flight Forward and Matternet. This is drone delivery in North Carolina, the great state. Number 7, Strange Night Waiver update. And we're not talking about eastern and western Nebraska UFOs that people were citing earlier this year. Stay tuned for this week's episode if you want to learn more. Welcome to Waiver Watch episode 34 on July 12th, 2020. I am all over the place. I'm off my game, but that's okay. We have a lot to cover, and we'll jump right into it. Hit us, Jakey, with the weekly waiver totals.
All right. So we're covering 2 weeks of waivers this week, and holy smokes, there was a variety. So let's go back 2 weeks. June 25th to July 1st, we had 25 waivers approved, 21 daylight operations, 107.29, 2 simultaneous operation of multiple small UAS, 107.35, and 2 BVLOS, 107.31 and 33. Of note, Eric Schwartz receives 3 of the 25 waivers for 12%. Guy's on fire. That's Florida Power and Light, for those of you that aren't familiar.
12%. I just want to say that 12%. So Eric Schwartz, one person, got 12% of all waiver approvals in the first week in July. Well, last week of June, first week in July.
That's right.
That's amazing.
It's a lot of waivers. Guy's on fire. All right. Last week, July 2nd through the 9th, had 23 waivers approved. The FA's been pretty consistent lately, like low 20s, just pumping them out. So we had 20 daylight operations, 1 high altitude, 107.51 Bravo, 1 operations over human beings, 107.39, and a complex. So this is 107.31, 33, 39. So it's like beyond visual line of sight over human beings. Whew. So if you total it, if you total all that up, right? So there's 41 daylight operations, but there was 7 just other waivers. That's like actually a pretty good percentage. Normally, night waivers are like over 90% of the waivers every week, but that's some good varieties. So,
and these waivers aren't exactly the easiest to obtain either.
No.
So, I don't know. What's the easiest one out of here? I think the altitude would probably be by far the easiest one to get out of these.
Other than night waiver, yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
But yeah, this is pretty amazing. So low numbers, but very complex waivers, very complicated waivers nonetheless. Yeah.
All right, let's start the pass back and forth here, right? We got a lot to cover. So,
all right, what team are you on? I'm Green Bay Packer fan for life. So I used to be
North Dakota, or wait. That's right.
Bison.
We don't have a team here.
Not a football fan, but we'll throw a ball every once in a while.
That's right. All right, kick it off.
Number 2. So number 1 was our weekly waiver totals. Number 2, Michael McGee and the University of Texas, El Paso. He has a 107.35 operations of multiple UAS waivers. Man, I'm getting good at saying that. And why are we getting good? We shot this earlier. I shot in 4K on my camera, ran out of space. Now we're shooting in 1080. Hopefully, we will keep it nice and short. Side tidbit there, but what can Michael McGee do with his new waiver in Texas? He can operate up to 5 aircraft simultaneously. A visual observer must be used. Aircraft failures must not cause a chain reaction, so if they have a failure in flight, it must exit the scenario gracefully and probably land or crash to the ground in a safe area. The aircraft must remain in a geofence area, and the waiver is approved for a specific location. So yeah, I just want to kind of touch base. Jake and I have been working on a pretty advanced operations of multiple UAS waiver for a while. And this is interesting to see this one get approved because it kind of speaks to some of the tactics that you need to approach when getting 10735. So Michael went with a very conservative number of 5, typically when you're doing drone light shows or some other, I'm maybe more speaking towards drone light shows, but when you want drone light shows, you want to get up to like 300. So you actually have a physical image that you can see in the air. But this is probably relatively straightforward for him. Maybe not so much. He probably has a lot of resources actually. So that's operating multiple UAS is not straightforward nonetheless. You need a lot of work. But this will be interesting to see what type of integration with the university has there. So it'd be good to see. I'll pass the football to you, Aaron Rodgers, going deep. Not with Randall Cobb, not with Jordy Nelson, all my favorite wide receivers. They are gone now. But anyways, to Jakey Stoltz.
You got your new wide receiver right here.
That's right.
The only other tidbit I probably have to add is, Mr. McGee's had a very decorated career in the Air Force. He retired. He's moved into policy research education. He's got a lot of different things going on by the looks of it, but this waiver appears to be related to kind of the UAS program that he's helping stand up at the University of Texas, El Paso there. Just looking at some of the news, they're working on things like public safety training, border security research. So it looks like a great UAS program at a university, a lot of fun. And he's just really kind of killing it down there with a lot of different UAS initiatives. So
absolutely.
I think that's all I got to say on that one.
Okay. Kicking it off in football fashion, Jakey, number 3, Florida Power and Light, triple waiver, Eric Schwartz, 12%. Go.
So Florida Power and Light's kind of turning into one of the, titans, of these advanced approvals.
Ooh, I like this Titans reference.
Oh yeah.
Is this the Tennessee Titans? Because maybe you should be talking about Florida State.
The Florida Titans. No, I'm just kidding. But, so he's been doing a lot with Florida Power and Light. They even had like a drone clip in their Super Bowl commercial this last year. There's a lot going on here. So he got 3 waivers in the span of 4 days. First kicked it out with a 10729. A night waiver, which is probably the easiest waiver Florida Power and Light has ever received. It's like, why didn't he have one of those already?
Why didn't he start with that, right?
Yeah. He started with the hardest ones.
The hard stuff first.
Yeah.
He probably has a hotline to the FAA, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So he gets this waiver, and why does he get a night waiver? Well, he wants to do multiple small UAS operations at night. So the third waiver he got was a 10735 to operate 2 aircraft simultaneously, and that is combined with his night waiver, so he can do that day or night. So that's 2 of his waivers. The third one was a BVLOS waiver, which really is just a building on all of the past BVLOS waivers that he's received from the FAA. So this waiver supersedes a waiver from earlier this year, which we covered in episode 19. That waiver from earlier this year superseded another one from 2019. So it just really shows that crawl, walk, run approach. He's just continually building on these approvals, getting more and more. So this most recent approval, it looks like it adds more locations. There's a provision that just mentions, as described in their BVLOS ConOp with a bunch of appendices. So he must be kind of expanding out that initial proof of concept. So back to you for some final comments on that one.
Final comments are, if you notice, the 10729 was approved on June 26th, and the 10735 was on June 30th. Now, what would have happened if he would have got the order flipped? So June 30th on the 10735, you couldn't attach the 10729 to that. So I find it interesting that it was a sequential approval because it's the way that it has to happen. You need your night waiver first in order to attach it to your June 30th. This is why I kind of think that there's a little bit of like inside, hotline to the FAA, because they probably said, you need to get this one first. Don't worry, we'll approve it on June 26th and we'll approve this one on June 30th so you can physically attach it.
Yeah, it's actually no secret. FP&L is, I think, one of the PSPs for the FAs. So
yeah,
big program, big initiative there for those guys. So
yeah. So that's all I have to say.
All right.
About that.
Keep her rolling.
All right. Number 4, 107.31 and 33 of Airobotics. Isaac Selah. Is that how we say it, Jakey? I think so.
I'd go with it.
Hope so. So Isaac Selah of Airobotics, they have an amendment to their COVID-19 BVLOS waiver. So back in the beginning of the COVID-19 kind of pandemic and the growing concerns, Airobotics was able to secure this waiver to allow them to do BVLOS operations. And they are a drone-in-a-box company, and they wanted to kind of maybe take advantage of this situation and move forward during a time of crisis and try to help out people. So what is interesting about this new update to their waiver is the fact that they are now removing the COVID-19 provisions. They've extended their waiver for an additional, is it 3 months, Jakey?
Yep, 3 more months.
Double checking that I'm correct there. So 3 months, they get an extension, and they don't reference the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is just really unique to see that a company took advantage of current situations in the US and in the world and made the best out of it. And probably in the meantime, while they were operating, they were able to gather operational data to share with the FAA saying, hey, I think we can do this safer even if conditions are starting to change. We know that there's a lot of safe start programs out there for different states and counties and getting people back to work. People are moving around a lot more than initially when this waiver was first granted. So this is good news. It's, again, kind of like the crawl, walk, run. You had an opportunity with a bunch of people kind of sheltering in place and not moving about, so your ground risk was much lower. Now they have proven that their system is probably operational and reliable, and now they're saying, hey, can we get a little bit more time to do some stuff? So maybe in 3 months, or sooner than 3 months, 2 months, right? We might see another revision. Maybe they'll get a little bit more. So they should probably take a note out of FP&L, their book, and see how to advance operations.
Go to one-to-many or something.
Yeah. Why not, right?
Yeah.
Scalability. Let's go, right?
Yep. I think
anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning. Like, typically the FAA doesn't go backwards, so that's like really important here. I think like you mentioned, it's the COVID-19 was maybe the catalyst to kind of kick this off, but they're making the best of it. And like I said, you typically don't go backwards. So once you've maybe established some sort of operation, as long as it's still safe, the FAA typically doesn't like take it away from you, right? So I'm sure even after these 3 months, I'm sure Airobotics will have something still on the end of that. Maybe another extension, maybe just some expansion. But I think it's great to see, take advantage. COVID-19, for how bad it was, maybe it was good for the drone industry in some ways. We have more drone delivery. We have some drone in a box coming out. Everybody's sort of looking at technology to help. So
right,
good stuff. So I'll keep it rolling, or you got anything else on that one?
No, I think we should go to Ryland. Right. Sorry, I keep saying Ryan.
Yeah.
Ryland Clark.
He's got the land in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So number 5, high altitude Ryland Clark. So we've been staring at this guy's name for months. So once in a while, we have a approval that happens in the future. And since the Part 107 waiver table is sorted by date of issued, and it's always the last one, when you get approved in the future, you just sit at the top. And so this was probably like back in February, March when he got approved. So he's been sitting at the top for months. I'm sure everybody knows his name. But it's a very interesting waiver. It's a high altitude for one location for 3 days, July 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And that's it. And so something, maybe 4th of July related, some fireworks or something. I mean, he's doing something unique here, or maybe getting some shots of a big firework display. I don't know, but it's gone already. Right. So,
yeah. So if you go to look this one up on the waiver table, FAA waivers granted table, it is not there. So once waivers expire, they don't bother keeping them on the waiver table anymore. So
Yep.
valid for July 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and gone on the 6th.
Yep. So hopefully he didn't have like bad weather all 3 days.
I mean, right? Like how? Ooh, that would be tough.
Yeah. Just it's so short, you know. It's like, man,
Right.
hopefully he got what he
high
needed.
winds. Like even if it was perfectly clear out, like he had just have high winds or something, right?
Yeah.
So, moving on, number 6, UPS Flight Forward and Matternet. So, just like Florida Power and Light, UPS Flight Forward and Matternet continue to build their programs in drone delivery and continue advancing their operations built on previous operational experience. Jakey, go ahead and kick the first one off because we're kind of covering 2 waivers side by side, UPS Flight Forward and Matternet. So, take UPS Flight Forward, Jakey.
All right. So yeah, they're similar, but maybe not. So we kind of lumped them together, like Brent said. But UPS Flight Forward received a 10739 waiver. This is very similar to waivers they received back in April and previously to do drone delivery. It is with the Matternet M2V9 aircraft, which we'll hit on more in a second. And do recall that these are they're doing drone delivery operations for the Wake Forest health campus that they've had a lot of news about. But do keep in mind these are visual line of sight deliveries. That's why this is allowed under these waivers. And so the 10739 just allows them to conduct these routes. There's 2 of them specified in this waiver, and they can sort of fly over the person that might be walking along the sidewalk, or maybe the car that just happens to drive underneath. So they don't have to clear the area out like other BVLOS ops. So very similar provisions. Again, we'll just hit a couple of them, and it's relevant because Brent will cover some differences on the next one. But with this approval, they have to operate 232 feet above non-participants, which is pretty high. But that's for their parachute to deploy fully. They can't sustain operations over non-participants or fly over open-air assemblies. So it just has to be kind of transiting over on their way to the other side. And the winds have to be under 15 miles an hour, which, again, is pretty low. But our thinking is that it minimizes the drift of the parachute if that were to happen. So I'll pass it over to Brent. So for a similar approval, but some differences, right?
Yeah,
go for it.
So I'll start off with the similarities. So again, very similar in the sense of approvals. There are some slight differences in provisions. So there were some altitude restrictions of 232 feet in UPS Flight Forward. Matternet, it was able to knock it down to 100 feet above non-participants, but they do have a lower wind restriction. So 11 miles per hour is the max winds that they can operate in. So 4 miles an hour less. And then this is probably where it gets a little bit more interesting. So they're still using the same aircraft from each waiver, but what is super interesting is some of the provisions that are included. And they are now discussing the types of emitters that are used within this operation. So an FCC experimental authorization may not be used for SUAS operations underneath this waiver. But then it says this waiver must include this waiver has additional provisions included on the C2 links below. So I'm kind of misstepping there a little bit. Anyways, command and control link equipment used under this waiver and other Jakey, I'm just absolutely butchering this.
Beep. Reset.
All right, here's my cut. Here's my cut and transition to you, okay? Right?
Go.
So, Jakey, the altitude restrictions and the weather limitations are slightly different, but what is the real icing on the cake here? Why is Matternet so much different than UPS Flight Forwards? Kick us off with that.
Yeah. So we noticed an interesting provision about the emitters. So it does include the standard provision that's like on every waiver where you have to have an FCC authorization. You can't use experimentals. That's on every single waiver, so that's standard. But there's a second provision relating to emitters, and it states, like almost every word of this is kind of interesting. We'll touch on why, but it states command and control link equipment used under this waiver for SUAS location information, other aircraft detection, and transmission and reception of SUA route of flight changes to avoid and remain well clear of other aircraft. So that's like, there's all these links doing all these functions, but none of them may be operated under Part 15 or Part 5 of 47 CFR. So,
what does that all mean? That's the real question,
Go
right?
ahead, dude. Yeah.
So, Part 15 is what we operate when we're using a DJI controller. So we have 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz. This is just a standard Part 15 radio for household electronics, essentially, is what it comes down to. Then Part 5 is this experimental. So since they're not using this, which is a good thing, because when you're flying BVLOS, you don't want to be using these links that are basically, when you're flying over a town, have you ever flown your DJI and you get this wireless interference? Like, this is bad, because if you're flying BVLOS, the last thing you want is interference, which your devices have to accept.
I got a quick note on that. So for all you watching, go to your Wi-Fi list and count how many Wi-Fi networks that you see right now. Right. Just remember, your drone also sees every single one of those interference.
And has to find the right controller, right?
Blah, blah, blah.
Smattered
right?
throughout the air.
It's a mess.
It's actually a really good point that you just brought up.
So keep going. Sorry. That was it.
Yeah. So good point there. So what is Matternet actually doing with this? And that's really probably where you have to kind of dissect. And we don't know exactly, but we can take some key words out of the provision, and it says things like SUAS location information, other aircraft detection, and transmission and reception of SUA route and flight changes to avoid and remain well clear of any other aircraft. So like, this is like dynamic flight changes, what they just kind of mentioned there, as well as, like detecting other aircraft. So you're remotely detecting aircraft, you're sending data somewhere. What's kind of going on here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where my mind goes is, okay, they've got a C2 link controlling the aircraft, of course, and it's something other than your standard, DJI Wi-Fi type of signals, which is good. Mm-hmm. But there's also some emitter, otherwise I wouldn't say this, that is detecting aircraft. Mm-hmm. So like maybe a radar, that's an emitter. Mm-hmm. We don't know what, but there is some DAA technology at play here that is emitting frequencies. So that definitely is interesting. Right.
So more to come, right? We will have to definitely keep an eye out on Matternet's social medias, their Facebook, their LinkedIn, press releases.
I'm guessing we're not going to hear about this for a while, because my kind of second guess is this is related to their DNR testing, which there was a news release maybe a couple weeks ago that they have started that. Mm-hmm. So something tells me this waiver is just kind of supporting those test activities, and they're trying out some new links, maybe some parachutes, stuff like that. So
yeah, maybe next time I'm in North Carolina, I'll have to do some snooping around. Just look up in the air in certain locations, right?
Yeah.
But so anyways, interesting things going there. Nice to see UPS Flight Forward and Matternet moving forward. Side note, this is all happening in North Carolina. Well, we don't know so much about the Matternet last portion, but North Carolina is a hub and a hotspot for first in flight, not only in manned aviation, but also unmanned aviation. They have 3 of the majors for drone delivery operating within their states. So you have Zipline, you have Flytrex, and you have Matternet, UPS Flight Forward, operating in North Carolina. So great team there. Not only is the FAA in full support, but also NCDOT, and there's just a lot of good resources right inside of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. It's very hot there, humid, muggy, but it's fairly nice most times. So I was just there last week flying, and it was amazing. So kicking it off and wrapping it up with Number 7, strange night waiver update. We're not talking about UFOs that were sighted in eastern Colorado and western Nebraska earlier this year that turned out not to be drones. But wasn't it like Elon Musk's Starlink, I think, was part of it, airplanes, wind turbines, a bunch of other stuff.
Who knows?
So, chaos and pandemics, right around the remote ID release. Remember that? Maybe a little bit of politicalness hopping in there. But kick us off with the strange night waiver update. Tell us what we worked on there.
Yeah. So we ended up working with a guy, Mark Taylor, who is kind of like OG. He's been operating US for a long time. He had Section 333 guy approvals, and he was one of the first to kind of get a night waiver. So this is, a 2016, like one of the first ones, and it had some interesting provisions. I mean, this is, again, we're kind of talking really early in 107 days. So the provisions were a little bit different back then. They were sort of figuring out night ops. One of them, for example, he couldn't fly higher than 200 feet above a structure, whereas normally you'd be able to operate 400 feet above a structure. And it wasn't in drone zone, essentially. Drone zone kind of rolled out after this, so it wasn't normal. It's like so early that there's just a lot of weird things about it. So we ended up getting an update to it for him. So now he's kind of got this modern waiver, but what were some of the other kind of nuances? I know you worked a lot of this, Brad. So
yeah, I mean, it just, when you don't have a waiver, when you had a waiver so soon before drone zone was a thing, it just makes future requests so much more complicated. So every time Mark would go and ask for something and he would attach his night waiver to these requests, it was always this extra explanation that was needed. Whereas typically, like, let's say you were going for a wide area authorization, you simply attach your night waiver to it by clicking a button, and that's it. You just pretty much ask for the airspace authorization, and then they see that you're qualified to do night ops, and they say, okay, fine, we'll attach it to that. But every time you went and did this, it was all this extra paperwork and this back and forth. So pretty much it was just wasting Mark's time, wasting FAA's time, and something that all it needed to be done was refreshed and put into drone zone so that the normal workflow was there. So anyways, that's what happens when you come to the game first and you obtain advanced operations. So again, Mark has been operating drones at night since 2016. That's, almost 4 years now, and which is pretty good. So
yeah. So some other interesting things. His new waiver, it's not really a renewal. It's kind of like an update. So they kept the same expiration date, which is December 31st of this year. So they could have just given him a longer time, but so he has to go back and get a renewal now in a couple months again, which is kind of odd. Right. They also gave him a new number. So normally when they do an update, an amendment, it just keeps their original number with a letter at the end. But they ended up giving him a new number completely. So those two things kind of like didn't match. Normally it's an update, you keep the same number, you just get maybe a provision tweak. But this was a new number with the old date, new provisions. Right. Just very different. Very weird.
So, well, anyways, he is squared away now, and hopefully there aren't too many, very archaic 2016 waivers out there that aren't in drone zone, because they do cause problems.
I think this is like almost a little foreshadowing, because at the end of this year, and I think they talked about renewals at the US Symposium this week, but at the end of this year, there's going to be a whole lot of waivers that expire, and they're going to have to go back through and renew them or not. Maybe some of these companies are just out of business, whatever, but it's going to be a little chaotic at the end of the year as they kind of turn over this first batch of old waivers, right? So we'll see what happens.
All right. So that about does it for this week's episode of Waiver Watch, episode 34. And wow, we had a lot to cover. And Jakey, I think one thing we've learned is that we can't miss a week in drones, because stuff happens. Lots of stuff. Lots of good stuff.
No rest for the weary.
That's right. So anyways, as always, check back next week, episode 35. We're not sure what's going to be there yet, but we're sure it's going to be exciting.
Right.
And as always, take care.
Fly safe.